A scenario. In Narva, in eastern Estonia, armed men appear in the streets, having splashed across the slender river which shares the city's name and which separates Estonia from Russia. Their uniforms are unbadged, but they speak Russian and carry Russian weapons. They march into Narva's handsome Baroque town hall, place the mayor under arrest, and declare that some sort of provisional government has been established. Russia denies any knowledge, but everyone knows what this is: the invasion of the sovereign territory of a member of NATO. In theory, this should be regarded as no less an outrage than shelling Lisbon, bombing Rome, or taking a potshot at Washington, D.C. Article 5 of the NATO treaty is pretty unambiguous. It says, effectively, mess with one of us, mess with all of us. But, should push meet shove, is that really what would happen? Especially if Russia proceeds sufficiently deniably that the current US administration would be able to pretend that it isn't really happening. And if NATO doesn't act, then does NATO really still exist? This is the question now vexing NATO's European members, none more so than the three Baltic states. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania joined NATO in 2004, a decade and change after recovering their independence from the Soviet Union. Having learned the hard way about the reality of living next door to Russia, they have spent the years since attempting to warn their allies further west, those warnings escalating in urgency after Russia attacked Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, and Ukraine in 2022. The recent Munich Security Conference, at which this episode was recorded, was another opportunity for the Baltics to reiterate their parallel themes of "please listen to us" and "we told you so." Is it too late to heed the Baltic doctrine? How might things be different if we had? And how can Russia best be deterred from trying its luck? This is the Foreign Desk.
We cannot drive the car anymore sitting in the back seat. We need to go and take the wheel.
In terms of making NATO more lethal, more powerful, making it a strong alliance, what has been voiced by United States, we fully agree in this regard.
Estonian Ministry of Defense last year calculated that it had been about 0.1% annually of our collective GDPs. Who on earth can win a war on these peanuts?
You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our first guest is Gabrielius Landsbergis, who was Foreign Minister of Lithuania until last December. I began by asking whether he was genuinely concerned for Lithuania's safety.
Yeah, I am. Quite strongly so. I'm quite certain that the decisions will be made. They will be presented as decisions. They will be made about Ukraine, about Europe, without Europe and Ukraine present. They might even be made about the European security architecture. I mean, Putin can ask, please remove US troops from Europe to a certain extent. And Trump might say, yeah, sure, why not? I can do that and present that as a good deal. And that directly affects my country.
I mean, I know that you and other politicians from the Baltic states, for all the obvious reasons, have been beating this drum for a long time. And it can't, I guess, be any satisfaction in being able now to say to people, see, we were right all along. But what's your sense, looking back on the last few years, of why people haven't wanted to listen? Is it they just didn't believe that Russia is actually a meaningful threat, or did they just not want to have to go back to their voters and explain, look, this is a thing and we are going to have to make some difficult, expensive choices?
That's a good question. We can bash ourselves that Europe, doesn't have leaders currently, of Churchillian type, the ones that will say, we'll never surrender. We'll fight, not rest in the beaches. But there is a reason why we don't have leaders. There's a reason why we're so slow. I mean,
which would be?
Well, because we were very fast in the past, with leadership and decisions, and it brought us 2 world wars. So basically, we did everything possible to slow us down, and we managed that quite well. We're really really slow now, right? And and now when history is literally being written every single minute in front of our eyes, we have to convene a Foreign Affairs Council, first informal today, then formal tomorrow, then leaders meeting a bit later in the evening, and then to discuss the agenda. By the end, when we're done with that, most probably we'll have news from Washington that the situation is already different, and in Ukraine and in Russia. So that's why we're fundamentally not suited to the situation. We don't have the instruments, so it's not just about leadership. You can have a leader like Kaja Kallas saying, we will never leave Ukraine. Sure, just give me some ammunition, and it will be fine at this point. We don't. So all is left, possibly, is the words. I don't want to sound that this is it. Just pack your things and let's all leave. It is possible, but then we need to answer some fundamental questions. Like, really, how do we operate in this situation? Is there a chance to, for this extraordinary time, somehow, give extraordinary powers, I don't know, to somebody, so that people would be able to make decisions on at least financing, on industry at least, on some parts of our, the way that continent functions, so that we would be able to, to respond to the crisis at hand.
Countries could do that unilaterally, though, outside of a NATO deployment.
They could, but the question will be, if Lithuania sends troops to Ukraine, can Russians retaliate to Lithuania, and whether that will be an Article 5 situation or not? If it doesn't, that basically destroys NATO, and it is very difficult to convince any of your people that we're sending our men.
And is that potentially right now, though, the inbuilt flaw of that NATO setup? That realistically, ultimately, the decision about whether Article 5 is a thing or not is in the hands of the President of the United States.
That's a bit outside. I'm still working in the domain of believing in Article 5. And I'm just asking whether extraterritorial operation of NATO in Ukraine, outside NATO territory, not NATO operation, but, bilateral, European, call it what you want, will we be, ready to meet Russian escalation if that happens? Basically, if we are going to control the escalation as such. So, but that works within Article 5 framework, right? So, President von der Leyen and many others, said that, okay, so we are entering the transactional phase of global environment. Okay, I would probably have to admit that it sounds like truth. But then the tiny question, how does Article 5 work in the transactional world? Because the Article 5 is not a transaction, it's trust. And we have just to trust, which is pacta sunt servanda, and this is a very ancient principle that you put your signature, I put my signature, and that's it. And we all believe that we know it, Putin knows it, and this is what makes it stable. If we say, now it's transactional.
And in the scenario you're describing, though, it's very easy to see how a president like Donald Trump would frame that as Lithuania is trying to bounce the United States into World War III, and I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, well, when we're saying that we are in the world of complete uncertainty, that means that we actually don't know what will happen. And it's almost impossible to calculate that. So the way that I function, I better prepare for the worst scenario and then celebrate if it doesn't happen rather than the opposite.
That was Gabrielius Landsbergis, former Foreign Minister of Lithuania. This is the Foreign Desk. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our next guest, who joined us on the roof of the Bayerischer Hof Hotel, to be clear, there was a broadcasting position, we weren't hurling slates in protest at anything, is Estonia's Foreign Minister and leader of the Estonia 200 party, Margus Tsahkna. I began by asking how worried he was that Ukraine might be bounced into a peace deal which was not only bad for Ukraine, but bad for Estonia.
You know, this is somehow like interesting that we have known this kind of problem of Putin's aggression already years.
10 years
from
now.
Estonia, since actually 2008, be honest, when Russia attacked Georgia. So for Estonia, we have nothing to change. You know, we have the same policies. We are investing heavily to defense, and we have proved that we are not only talking, we are acting as well. This is one thing. But now I think that the masks has been falling in the meaning that everybody was waiting even all the year, what was the previous year because of the campaign, what will happen with US. Now it's clear. We will have a very strong relations continuously, but this relation will be different. It's one thing. The second thing, the phone call of Trump to Putin, I think that it changed as well the mentality of European leaders. It is really obvious that because of this relation is different, we need to do more. As well, President Zelensky has said very clearly that without Ukraine, there cannot be any deal. I see the change of mentality here as well, that the understanding that we cannot drive the car anymore sitting in the back seat. We need to go and take the wheel. And we must be very clear about that nothing can be discussed and agreed about Europe without us. And I think this knowledge is more here than it was a year ago.
But do you get the sense, though, that the mentality this time has really changed? Because this must be incredibly frustrating for somebody in your position, because, you know, for us as a programme going to these conferences over the last few years, we have heard so many times from politicians from the Baltic states, Poland in particular, that this is serious, that this is not a problem that's going to go away, and that all of Europe needs to wake up to this.
Yes, it can happen that we are going to repeat 1938 Munich. Somehow the parallels are there, really. But if I'm talking to foreign ministers and other leaders of Europe, I think that the mentality has changed. And not because of the last phone call, but I think during the last 3 years, because of the real evidence that Russia is a threat. He's waging the war and with all these atrocities. And it's pretty obvious for everybody in Europe that Russia can and will continue that. Now the question is how much one or the other European country is ready to actually deliver. And this is a problem. We see that Poland, Baltic states, we will do 5%, not because of President Trump, because of the necessity what we have, as well because that we agreed amongst Nato in Vilnius summit, the new defense plans for our region. They're real, but we know as well that there are gaps we need to fulfill, not because of President Trump, because of the practicalities. So what I do hope that maybe this call, the Trump's call to Putin was some kind of the real action, that it's not that someone else is coming to solve our problems in Europe. Someone else can maybe try to solve the problems between two parties without us. And this is a serious thing. And it's not only about the Baltics and Poland, it's about Europe.
But does that mean we have actually reached the point, incredible though it sounds, after the last 80 years or so, or even the last 110 years or so, that Europe has to start thinking past the idea that the United States is going to be an eternally reliable ally?
One thing I'm sure that Article 5 is there. This kind of commitment, the NATO commitment from US side is there.
You're sure that's not just wishful thinking?
I'm sure that it is not wishful thinking, but the message from President Trump, but also previous presidents of US, has been very clear that the balance is out if we're talking about the investments to defense in NATO. So US is paying a lot more than Europe, but we are the rich neighborhood in the world. And we are not dealing with that because of President Trump, but already years. So it must be not a wake-up call, because I think that these wake-up calls, we have had many of them. But the reality, I feel this reality has been, arriving, that this relation with US will be different. Because Trump is waiting as well strong position from us. If we're just trying to please Trump, it never works. We need to be strong. We need to negotiate. We need to have our positions, and this is existential for us as well. But there may be an opportunity as well that in a moment when we need US and we are not doing our part, I don't know what Trump is going to decide, but Europe and US is so much connected, not militarily only, but economically. So the price will be higher as well, not only for Europe, but for US as well. But I do hope that we can find now the decisions about more sanctions. We started the topic about Russian frozen assets 2 years ago. Estonia adopted last year the law in Estonia, which is one of the most conservative country about the rights of the protection of the private properties, and it is doable by law. And now today in Munich, 2 years later, I see the real discussions amongst even these countries who are totally against that maybe we can do it. Maybe we can do it. We can seize these assets, like more than 300 billion.
300 billion, yeah.
But is it enough? Is it the right time? I don't know. I think that we lost 10 years. But we need to act anyways.
Well, from where we're standing then, do you have an idea of an optimum outcome? If we resume this conversation at the Munich Security Conference 2026, what is absolutely, to your mind, the best things could possibly look?
After 1 year?
Yeah.
I do hope that this war has been stopped in a solid ways. We have actually resources, and actually Ukraine has as well resources to fight back right now this year. We can fund even if the US is blocking his aid, we can fund this year using the European money and as well frozen assets. So, and Ukrainians, they will fight. But if we do together with the US the sanctions and the energy sanctions and lowering the oil price, also US has a great opportunity together with EU talking about China, because China is the enabler, economical enabler already 3 years for Russia to wage this war. So if we can do these kind of steps, we can maybe change as well the Putin's goal. And the Putin's goal, as I mentioned before as well, was not to gain some more territories, but it was actually to turn NATO back to the year of 1997. And he repeatedly says that the root causes. And he will eliminate these root causes during these talks, what he wants to start with Trump. So we need to understand that it's not about Ukraine only. So after 1 year, I do hope that there is no war. And there is a long-lasting peace. We don't know how long, but at least granted by working security guarantees, together with the US.
That was Margus Tsahkna, Foreign Minister of Estonia. This is the Foreign Desk. This is the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. The 3 Baltic states are, unsurprisingly, big spenders on defence, relative to their GDPs among NATO's biggest spenders. They are, however, small countries in terms of territory and people. Between the 3 of them, they barely match the population of St. Petersburg. Where Latvia is concerned, the considerable challenge of defending it is the portfolio of Andris Spruds, Latvia's Minister of Defence. I began by asking him whether the Baltic states' allies were starting to take matters as seriously as the Baltic states themselves.
There is a diversity of mindsets, there is diversity of threat perceptions. And I would say, unfortunately, because on the one hand, we very clearly define, also in NATO strategic concept, Russia is a threat. We introduce sanctions on European Union level, but still next steps also must be made. So that's why I would not say the glass is full empty, not at all. I mean, many things have been done, many things have been improved, also in terms of the understanding what we are all facing. But I fully agree that the basis, the important solid basis to build capabilities and decrease spending, it's a common mindset, it's a common threat perception, it's a common understanding what we are all facing. Russia is expansionist country, and we have to deal with such Russia in a long-term perspective.
But are you concerned that that threat of Russia as an expansionist country becomes amplified if a botched peace is forced on Ukraine? Because, I'm sure that you and other frontline states have done the maths on this. This is all of a sudden tens of thousands of Russian troops that would be free to be redeployed along Russia's other borders, and it may require Latvia and other European countries to actually send their own troops to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping mission. That would leave Latvia more vulnerable, wouldn't it?
Well, let's see the next developments as well, because again, on any peace agreement, what takes place in Ukraine, it is our firm position. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Ukraine must agree on those conditions. Europe must support, continuously and unwaveringly support Ukraine. Latvia, together again with Baltic countries, more than 0.25% from our GDP militarily goes to Ukraine. So we'll be, of course, contributing to Ukraine's security and defenses. At the same time, yes, we are building up our own defenses, as I mentioned about the percentage. This year 3.5%, next year close to 4%, and we are actually now considering moving higher, so closer to even 5%. So we are moving there. So that's why, yes, this is an existential threat what we are facing, Russia. So where are troops located? These are the details. Important, but details. Strategically, certainly those considerable fundamental steps must be made. We are doing it, but certainly we must encourage our partners, our allies in Europe also to make those steps. And in this regard, yes, we might be careful about some of the statements what we've heard in terms of the peace settlement in Ukraine, but in terms of making NATO more lethal, more powerful, making it a strong alliance, what has been voiced by United States, we fully agree in this regard.
But are you still as confident as you might have been a year ago that Article 5 of the NATO treaty is quite the protection for a country like Latvia that it might have been? Because everybody knows what the nightmare scenario is if Vladimir Putin decides to push his luck. He bites off a small chunk of Estonia or Latvia and then dares the rest of the world to fight World War III over that. Are you absolutely confident that in a scenario like that, the United States under this administration would show up?
Yes, I'm absolutely confident. I'm absolutely confident about the principle of one for all for one. There is one NATO. There are no several NATOs. There is no one NATO, which is an eastern flank, and then there is some other NATO, which is in Central Europe, and then there is a third NATO, which is somewhere over the ocean. We are all facing similar threats, and we are all actually facing threats. It's about, of course, what we see in Central Europe. It's about Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It's the Arctic, and again, the militarization of the Arctic also implemented by Russia. We see the Indo-Pacific developments. And again, if we come back to strategic concept, Russia is a threat, China is a challenge, and this challenge might be rising. So we are all interested. There is a common interest that NATO is strong and lethal, and it becomes even stronger. And of course, the article number 5 is the sort of rock on which the trust and the confidence is being built up. And so I believe that everyone is interested in NATO, everyone is interested in keeping Article 5. So that's why also Latvia is confident about NATO allies applying, if any conditions sort of would come, also Article 5.
I know nothing has been...
So attack against Latvia, any attack or any such kind of scenario would be direct attack against NATO.
I know nothing has been decided yet about Ukraine and nothing has been agreed, but President Trump has raised this idea of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine to police any future agreement. And he's also made it clear that he's not interested in sending American troops as part of that. In that circumstance, would Latvia be willing to send its troops to Ukraine, given that you would then be much more vulnerable and your military is a fairly small one as it is?
Well, first of all, on a basic principles, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So Ukraine must agree, if any conditions are being put, specific conditions are being put at the table, that Ukraine is willing to accept them. This is his firm position. Russia is the aggressor country, and we cannot speak from positions of weakness with Russia. And actually, it was also underlined in a meeting of the ministers of defense: peace through strength. The strength is absolutely crucial in this regard, negotiating and acting from positions of strength. Let's see the details as well, and let's see the negotiation process. If it starts, again, I don't think that Russia is interested in peace. I mean, Russia has proven to be doing complete opposite things. Sometimes speaking about the peace, but invading other countries or implementing hybrid warfare activities against its neighbors. So there is nothing peaceful about Russia and from Russia. And of course, Russia's approach always has been salami tactics. You cut off a piece and then you, after some time, go for another one. So it should be stopped in Ukraine. It should be stopped anywhere. Such kind of tactics are sort of element of willingness to implement them. So again, once more coming back, if there is the some peace settlement. If there is any peace settlement, Ukraine must agree on this. Europe must play part of this. Yes, Europe, of course, must play an increasing role on European continent. It's also understandable, but then we have to see also modalities. Peacekeeping operations or missions differ from peacekeeping missions and operations. There are diversity of different peacekeeping operations. So that's why we cannot speak about some specific details before we got the details on the table and actually then strategic agreement on those details.
But on that thought, is it a source of frustration again to frontline states such as yourself when you think about peace through strength that Europe in particular just hasn't been strong enough? I mean, is there conversation among especially Baltic defence ministers, Eastern European defence ministers, to the effect that Ukraine could maybe have won this war by now if they'd been given everything they wanted when they wanted it?
Yes, we believe that Ukraine must have received more. That if you calculate all finances together, military support, 0.25%, for instance, what Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania provides. If everyone would provide 0.25% militarily to Ukraine, actually it had been a threefold the size of the finances and military support. Ukraine must have had a much bigger sort of chances also already prevailing in the war. But it doesn't mean that if something didn't happen in the past that we should stop things immediately doing now. Not at all. If Ukraine and Ukrainian people, and they do it bravely, fight for their independence, for their territorial integrity, it's their choice, and we have to support, because implications of this war are much wider than just about Ukraine, much wider than just about Europe. It's about a global international order. It will have direct repercussions in the Pacific. It's about international norms on what kind of world we live in. So that is what we have been voicing also to our US counterparts, that this is much wider picture. So of course, this is a dialogue. This is, I would say, also, as always with new administration, the beginning of dialogue. So we have clearly made our positions as well. So I think and I hope that there is also the chance of convergence of some of those details.
Well, if we try and close then on a faintly optimistic note, I think it's probably pretty clear that the atmosphere around this Munich Security Conference will be very different from the one a year ago. If we resume this conversation at the Munich Security Conference this time next year, what's your idea of what a best case scenario would look like where Ukraine is concerned and where, I guess, the West's relationship with Russia is concerned?
Well, of course, the most important part is to keep unity of like-minded nations, that we are not starting to, in a sense, quarrel among ourselves. Yes, sometimes there might be some differences, there might be diversities, and that's where what is our sort of the blessing of being democratic countries, with also, of course, societies influencing decisions. So this is what is important, to keep the solidarity, unity, and confidence that let's not underestimate ourselves, because sometimes Munich Security Conference, of course, this is a good thing, but there is a self-criticism, westlessness, that we are not anymore influential. No, look at the economical power, innovative power. Some things absolutely should be changed, some things must be improved. Absolutely, if we perceive it as existential threat, we must perceive Russia as existential threat. Defense must be, of course, the budget increased. Then support for Ukraine must be continuous, both in military terms but also in strategic terms, for Ukraine to become EU and NATO member. Yes, of course, there is again some diversity, but it should not be somehow put off the table, not at all. Irreversibility of NATO membership for Ukraine is on the table. Yes, with formula, when allies agree and conditions allow. It has been already in the past. It's nothing new. So in the short term, apparently allies yet not agreeing on this. And of course, last but not least, let's not overestimate what Russia is. The bluffing, this is a bluffing and blackmailing. This is what Russia is doing for centuries. And of course, now we see it even more clearly. Putin's regime is at stake. So I believe sooner or later, this pregnancy of self-destruction, what Putin started invading Ukraine, actually will bear the fruit. Basically, this regime will be undermined by its own activities, and Russia will be contained and contested if necessary.
That was Andris Spruds, Latvia's Minister of Defence. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our final guest is not only a member of a reasonably exclusive cohort who have met both US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, but of an even more rarefied strata who have done so while president themselves. Kersti Kaljulaid, who was president of Estonia from 2016 to 2021. I began by asking President Kaljulaid to assess her levels of frustration at the deafness of much of the rest of Europe to repeated wake-up calls.
If any frustration indeed we have, then this is directed at our European partners and allies. I mean, one of my French friends reminded me that French have dedicated 5 billion to help Ukraine, but as soon as coronavirus hit, they spent 100. If you could reverse, I mean, these proportions or even draw even, then we would be much better off. So basically, I mean, I think it's very frustrating that we make all the big words about standing by Ukraine, and this has been all 3 years of this war now. We stand so close by the Ukraine that we get myopic about the fact that we haven't done everything our economies would allow us to do. Estonian Ministry of Defense last year calculated that it had been about 0.1% annually of our collective GDPs. Who on earth can win a war on these peanuts? It's not doable. So basically, yes, we are frustrated, and yes, of course, we would prefer to have kind of a more stable and classic foreign policy style from United States. But I mean, I also appreciate what Peter Heks has said, that Eastern allies have been actually spending, naming Poland, but I'm sure they look at the others as well. And the bitter joke about it all is that, I mean, if US chooses to defend those NATO allies who, I mean, meet spending criteria, then everybody behind the Balts and Poles can be very calm because we are in between them and Russia. Is it fair? No, I think there is fair amount that the big European nations could do more, and I hope they will do more.
It's something we've not spoken about before, because when we've spoken before, it hasn't seemed all that relevant, but it has become relevant again since Donald Trump was re-elected. You are among a very small coterie of people who know what it's like to interact with Donald Trump as president to president. When you spoke to him, when you were both presidents of your respective countries, what sense did you get of his level of interest in the United States' historic role of European protector?
I think he was very much interested to have big economic presence on this continent, hence his interest in Free Seas Initiative, which was at that time the only positive economic policy initiative which US and Europe in somehow shared. So I think this is indeed maybe the difference, that the interest is mainly there, and if we listen also to the discussions with Ukrainians, we hear that there is a hint of this kind of, well, we want to do business with you. If you can build on that, then of course you cannot do business with those who are not secure. So you can build on that trend and tendency, and I think this is how it should be done.
But would you have any advice you could pass on for European leaders now trying to bring him round to their way of thinking? I mean, when you're actually speaking to him, did you learn anything about how to, I guess, spark his interest in particular subjects?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have harsh numbers to back up what you are saying, like if you say you care about security, then spend, and then you are believed that you do spend. We spent already then 2%, and by 2016, when he came to power, we had been spending many years already 2%, and we're going above. So basically, I mean, if you have these harsh numbers in place, then that's fine. And that was really appreciated and praised. And also when we celebrated our 100 years of republics, then I remember very well Donald Trump being very, very happy to meet and greet his Baltic allies in White House and saying that they have never let us down and they shall never let us down. So basically, you cannot do anything with words with him. That's the European problem. You have to really show, I mean, what you have to show for your words.
So is it that thing of leaning into his transactional view of the world and explaining to him this is what the upside for the United States is?
Basically, of course. I mean, in principle, he of course realizes that Iran, China, Russia, North Korea tend to stick together as the axis of evil. So basically, of course, I mean, we should do more and demonstrate that we are doing more to contain these risks which emulate from that axis. So I'm sure this can be discussed, but only by doing. not just promising.
And it is going back a bit further, but you have also interacted president to president with Vladimir Putin of Russia. You said last year that his ambitions were nothing less than reconstituting Russia's empire. Does it surprise you that he doesn't appear to have been daunted at all by the last 3 years in Ukraine? This was a war that was supposed to take 72 hours.
I think because he is able to remain in power despite all the losses, then that's all what he cares about. He doesn't care about human suffering. This is very obvious. And this way, of course, he can tolerate this war. Unfortunately, we know that they still have quite many soldiers on their arms, maybe over 1 million even. So it is tough. But we have to make sure that we are able to make very clear that our red lines will hold, because we have our force to be able to contain him.
But does that remain the fundamental problem, though, that he's not going to stop until he is stopped?
Absolutely. But this has been very obvious for 3 years. And actually it was obvious, I would say, when he attacked Georgia. What did we do as Europe?
Very little.
Quite to the contrary. Nicolas Sarkozy, who was then the president of the nation which was holding EU presidency, flew to Moscow, said, I've settled everything 40 kilometers from Tbilisi. So in his style, we would have settled everything 10 kilometers from Kiev. We were better this time, but we need to get even more better, much better.
So do you get the sense, a bigger problem being stacked up here if Ukraine is bounced into some sort of peace which favours Russia, that Russia is allowed to keep what it has taken? Does that just store up greater problems further down the track, especially for countries in a position like Estonia?
I think if the agreement comes without the Ukrainian involvement or Ukrainians feeling that they were forced to something too much, then we have a problem. If Ukrainians will, take stock, calmly discuss and decide that for time being, at some point, the question, their own citizens might be asking is, it's burnt land. How many people need to die to get it back fully? I think this is a legitimate debate which only Ukrainians can have. And if they have come to the conclusion that temporarily they might accept a ceasefire and an agreement with security guarantees and not getting all their territories back, this is for them to decide. The problem is if they are not in the driving seat of this agreement, then we really have a problem, because then we will have a kind of a ceasefire which helps Russia to...
But just as a final thought then, if that is to happen, is Europe right now in a position to provide those security guarantees without US support?
No, obviously it right now isn't, but I think Europe as well is somewhat reacting. We heard Chancellor Scholz to say that Germany needs to call an emergency, which will allow Germany to spend more freely. And we also heard Ursula von der Leyen to say that this situation, shouldn't be treated differently vis-à-vis Maastricht criteria than we did it during COVID pandemic. Later, when asked and prodded about, what Europe can do, she clearly put responsibility with the member states, though. So we don't know where we stand with the European defense borrowing. But overall, I think the urgency is also reaching Europe. Problem is Europe is always very slow, even in the urgency.
That was Kersti Kaljulaid, former president of Estonia. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Anita Riota and Lily Austin. Lily also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email Anita at aer@monocle.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Monocle magazine and to our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.